Greetings everyone, we are back with another lecture on general awareness, and this time we'll be examining India's relationship with its refugees. Now, let's get acquainted with some basic questions. Firstly, is there an international policy on refugees, for refugees? The answer is yes. One is the 1951 UN Refugee Convention, and the other is the 1967 Protocol, both of which were designed after millions of people were displaced across Europe after World War II. Now, please note that both adopt the principle of non-refoulement. Non-refoulement is a principle which forbids a country which is receiving asylum seekers from returning them to a country in which they would be in likely danger of persecution. Now, this may be in terms of race, religion, nationality, membership of a group, or a political opinion. Now, has India adopted these two policies? No. Does India practice the non-refoulement principle? Largely, yes. It is a signatory to the 1984 Convention Against Torture. However, repatriation of Sri Lankan Tamils and Rohingyas remain an exception. Now, what are the laws governing refugees in India? Now, please note that refugees have not really been defined within Indian laws. They are largely considered under the ambit of the term alien. Now, please note that the term alien appears in the Indian Constitution under Article 22. At present, there are three laws governing refugees in India. These are the Foreigners Act 1946, the Registration Act 1939, and also the Passport Acts of 1920 and 1967. Now, what exactly happens when a refugee enters India? Basically, they run a risk of getting arrested by the immigration authorities, and they will be subsequently prosecuted if they enter India without any valid travel documents, for example, a passport. But because there is no established framework for refugees in India, the Supreme Court has usually been lenient by directing the government to grant refugees their fundamental rights. So what are these fundamental rights? We can start with the right to equality, Article 14, right to life and personal liberty, protection under arbitrary arrest, protection in respect of conviction of offences, protection for freedom of religion, and of course, right to address their grievances in the Supreme Court, Article 32. So, please note these basic rights that are granted to refugees in India. Now, let's start off with the countries in question. Let's start off with Pakistan. Let's go way back to 1947, when massive population exchanges occurred between the two newly formed nations, India and Pakistan, based on the 1951 census. Over 15 million Hindus and Muslims were displaced from their respective countries immediately after partition. Some experts see partition as a culmination of communal politics that started developing way before the partition in the opening decades of the 20th century. So, for example, partitioning of Bengal in 1905 by Lord Curzon, the 1909 Molemento reforms, the 1919 Montague-Chelmsford reforms, both of which focused on creating separate electorates for the Muslims, crucially shaped the nature of communal politics in India, as a result of which we had the partition. Let's focus on Tibet. Tibet was largely peaceful. There was a large movement of refugees towards India, especially by the then Dalai Lama, who had brought along with him over 100,000 followers. They fled Tibet and came to India seeking political asylum. Now, for India, granting this asylum proved very costly to them. earning the ire of the Chinese government. This was actually one of the major causes of the 1962 Sino-Indian War. The Tibetan refugees, however, continue to live harmoniously with other local Indian groups and are largely seen as a very peaceful community settled across the north and the northeastern parts of India. The seat, as you might be aware, of the Dalai Lama is established at Dharamshala in Himachal Pradesh. Now, moving on to Bangladesh. So the next major refugee crisis happened during the Bangladesh's War of Independence. This happened in 1971. Why? There are various reasons. The major reason for the war to have taken place is the failure of the Punjabi speaking, the Urdu speaking West Pakistan to understand the Bengali nationalist sentiments of the East Pakistan. Usually East Pakistan had little to no say in the military run West Pakistan. They also faced economic marginalization. Foreign exchange, for example, earned from the export of East Pakistani jute was actually used for industrializing West Pakistan. Similarly, foreign aid was diverted to West Pakistan projects, which was usually far more developed than East Pakistan. Basically, what followed suit was India providing military help to Bangladesh in their War of Independence. But unfortunately, this resulted in the influx of millions of refugees migrating from Bangladesh to India, who were trying to escape the war between the West Pakistani forces and the domestic forces in Bangladesh. So basically, according to some estimates, over 10 million Bangladeshi refugees escaped in the 1971 war and took shelter in India. Now, unlike the Tibetan refugees, the Bangladeshi refugees are seen as a security threat. They are actually seen as the most unwelcome group in the states of Assam, Tripura, Manipur, and some other northeastern states as well. Why? Because the local communities allege that the refugees from Bangladesh continuously flow into their land even to this day and have eventually changed their social demography in such a way that the locals have become a minority in their own homeland. This was Bangladesh, but we'll soon be revisiting Bangladesh once again in the later part of the video. Let's move ahead to Sri Lanka. What happened with Sri Lanka? Great Britain ruled Sri Lanka, then called Ceylon, from 1815 to 1948. Now, as per the 1981 census, Sinhalese, the Buddhist Sinhalese, comprised of 74% of the population, while the Tamil populace covered about 15% of the demography. After decades of increasing tension between the Tamil-speaking Hindus and the Buddhist Sinhalese, the Sri Lankan civil war began in 3 phases, starting in 1983, July until 2009. Now, the period between 1983 to 2013, this period actually saw over 3 lakh Tamilians seeking refuge in Tamil Nadu in an effort to flee the massacres between Sri Lankan army and the Tamil Tigers. So currently, there are over 64,000 Sri Lankan Tamils living in refugee camps inside Tamil Nadu, and 40,000 of them are estimated to be living outside the camps across Tamil Nadu. So that's Sri Lanka. Coming to Afghanistan. Afghanistan situation actually involved the Soviet Union. Basically, in 1978, the then Soviet Union, USSR, supported a communist government called the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. Many of the Afghanistanis did not support this new communist government because it sort of their laws went against their Islamic religion. They began to rebel against the government, and these rebels called themselves the Mujahideen. The Soviet army battled them for many years, but with very little success. In fact, by 1988, Mikhail Gorbachev had to sign a peace treaty to end the war. As a result, during this entire period of the war between the Soviet Union army and the Mujahideen, around 5 million people fled from Afghanistan. While most went to Pakistan and Iraq, a significant chunk of the Afghanis entered India. As per the current reports by World Bank and UNHCR, India is currently housing over 200,000 Afghan refugees at the moment. Now, coming to Myanmar, what's happening to Myanmar, or erstwhile Burma? Now, the history of Burma was such that it was conquered by Britain in 1824, and until 1948 they were a part of British India. Now, what happened was that as soon as Burma, that is present day Myanmar, got independence, they worked to exclude the Rohingya community, which is a minor Islamic community that actually has its roots from Bangladesh. So they started excluding the Rohingya community from their constitution. One such example that I could quote was that in 1982, Myanmar actually passed a citizenship law that completely denied Rohingya any form of citizenship, thereby denying them protection or their basic fundamental rights. Now, in 2012, this is a very important year for Rohingyas, unfortunately, because it was from this year onwards that Rohingyas were savagely evicted from their homes, their lands were confiscated, their villages were plumaged, and over 723,000 people had to flee the country. Now, the thing is, Rohingyas, like I mentioned before, had their roots in Bangladesh. These were minorities who were migrated from Bangladesh in the British era as plantation workers. So they are ethnically Bengalis. They actually were relying on Bangladesh to be accepted as refugees. Initially, Bangladeshi authorities did welcome them. They were very lenient, but with the rising number of immigrants, Dhaka chose to stop all humanitarian assistance to the Rohingyas, unfortunately. They tried to seek help from Thailand, Malaysia and Indonesia, but to no avail. When all the doors were shut on them, they turned towards India. Now, as of 2018, there were about 40,000 Rohingya Muslims living in India. The government did the government had to decide on repatriating some of them back to Bangladesh or Myanmar. So this continues to be a very complicated issue even today. Now, as promised, I did tell you that we are going to come back to Bangladesh, very notorious for its refugee situation, but this time we are going to look at two communities called the Chakmas and the Hajongs. Now, the Chakmas are predominantly Buddhist, while the Hajongs are Bengali Hindus. They both lived in the Chittagong hill tracts in Bangladesh, but unfortunately, due to a development of a dam called the Kaptai Dam on the Karnafuli River, they were displaced and they had to actually move out of that entire area, and the government of Bangladesh did not give them any compensation or resettlement plans. Plus, the fact that they were non-Muslims and did not speak Bengali did not help their cause. So they eventually sought asylum in India. The Indian government back then set up relief camps for them in Arunachal Pradesh, right here. And a majority of them continue to live there ever since. According to the 2011 census, over 47,000 Chakmas live in Arunachal Pradesh alone. So basically, estimates say that over 100,000 Chakma and Hajong refugees are spread across India. So these are the neighboring countries that have sought refugee status from India. That said, I mentioned in the video earlier that India has neither signed the 1951 UN Refugee Convention nor has it signed the 1967 protocol. Both these protocols and conventions have over 140 signatories, which is an overwhelming majority out of the 190 nations. But India has not signed it, and in fact, India is one of the largest refugee provider in Asia. In spite of that, India hasn't signed the treaties. The thing is, the issue with that is that due to the absence of any legal framework for the refugees, unfortunately, they are often exploited for their labor and services by industrialists and corporates because they remain unintegrated without any rights. They are not recognized, they are stateless, and they do not have any legal framework to protect them. So this is the refugee status, the current situation that India is facing, which is a prelude to the videos that will be coming up on CAA, NPR and NPC. So if you like this video, please give this video a thumbs up, share, subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much for dropping by. Good day.